Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest. In a world that measures worth by what your body can do, imagine being sold by your own family because you cannot walk. Ylva knew this pain when her kin traded her for a handful of coins, calling her a burden too heavy to bear. She was given to Sten, a giant Viking warrior, to be delivered like cargo to strangers. But during their long journey through frozen lands, something unexpected happened. Sten began to see her true worth, not in her legs, but in her brilliant mind and unbreakable spirit. When danger came, it wasn't his sword that saved them, but her wisdom. What would make a feared warrior kneel before someone the world had thrown away? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The winter wind cut through Holtgard like a blade through bone, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of harder days ahead. In the dim light of dawn, the village huddled beneath a grey sky, its thatched roofs heavy with frost that never seemed to melt. Smoke rose from scattered chimneys in thin, desperate ribbons, as if the very fires within struggled against the cold that had settled over the land like a curse. In the cramped stone cottage at the village's edge, Ylva, Eric's daughter, sat by the dying embers of the hearth, her fingers wrapped around a simple walking stick carved from birch wood. The stick had been her constant companion for 3 winters now, ever since the accident that had stolen the use of her legs and, with them, her place in the world. She traced the worn grooves in the wood with her thumb, remembering the day her father had carved it for her, back when there was still hope in his eyes and tenderness in his voice. Those days felt like stories from another life now. The cottage door creaked open, letting in a gust of bitter air, and her father, Eric, the blacksmith. His shoulders, once broad and proud, now seemed permanently bent under the weight of disappointment. He stomped his boots against the threshold, shaking off the snow, but did not look at his daughter as he entered. "Father," Ylva said softly, "the fire needs tending." "Shall I save your breath?" Eric muttered, moving past her to warm his hands over the coals. "We have matters to discuss." Her mother, Astrid, emerged from the back room, her face drawn with the kind of weariness that sleep could not cure. In her hands she carried a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth, the last of Ylva's possessions, including the silver arm ring that had belonged to her grandmother. It was the only thing of value Ylva still owned, a delicate band etched with intricate knotwork that spoke of better times and noble blood. "The arrangement has been made," Eric said without ceremony, his words falling into the room like stones into still water. "Sten Haraldsson arrives today. He will take you north to Bjornstad, where you'll be useful to someone who has need of such as you." Ylva's heart clenched. She had known this day would come, had felt it approaching like storm clouds on the horizon, but the reality of it still struck her like a physical blow. "Father, please, I can contribute here. My mind is sound, my hands are steady, I can keep accounts, teach the children their letters." "Teach them what?" Eric's voice cracked like a whip. "To be burdens on their families? To shame their bloodline with weakness?" He turned to face her then, and Ylva saw in his eyes not the love she had once known, but something far worse, indifference. "We cannot feed another mouth that gives nothing back. The coins Sten brings will keep your brothers fed through the winter." "Eric," Astrid whispered, but her protest carried no strength. "Do not make this harder than it must be," Eric continued, his tone softening only slightly. "You are 18, winter's old Ylva. In the old days, you would have been wed by now, with children of your own. But what man would take a wife who cannot tend his home, cannot bear him strong sons? This is the only path left to you." Ylva clutched her walking stick tighter, feeling the familiar ache in her chest that came whenever she thought of what she had lost. Before the accident, she had been different. She remembered running through the village square, her long golden hair streaming behind her like a banner. She remembered the day the Jarl himself had noticed her quick mind and invited her to learn letters alongside his scribes. Those had been golden days, when the future stretched before her like an endless summer field. But that was before the horse, before the terrible crack of breaking bone, before the fever that followed and left her legs forever weakened, forever unable to carry her weight for more than a few steps at a time. "Where is this Bjornstad?" she asked quietly. "What manner of I? Work awaits me there." Eric and Astrid exchanged a glance that made Ylva's stomach tighten with unease. "You need not trouble yourself with such details," her father said. "Sten Haraldsson is a man of honor. He has given his word to see you safely to your destination." A heavy knock echoed through the cottage, and Eric hurried to the door. When it opened, Ylva felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. The man who filled the doorway was enormous, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span the width of the entrance. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, streaked with early silver at the temples, and his beard was neatly braided in the style of a seasoned warrior. But it was his eyes that caught Ylva's attention, pale blue like winter ice, yet somehow warm as they swept over the humble interior of the cottage. "Eric Blacksmith," the giant said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "I am Sten Haraldsson." "Lord Sten," Eric said, bowing. His head, "We are honored. Come, warm yourself by our fire." Sten stepped inside, and Ylva noticed how carefully he moved, as if aware that his great size might overwhelm the small space. His gaze fell upon her, and she felt herself being measured not with the dismissive glance she had grown accustomed to, but with something that looked almost like curiosity. "You are Ylva," he said. It was not a question. "I am," she replied, lifting her chin with what dignity she could muster. She would not cower before this stranger, no matter how her family had bartered her away. Sten nodded slowly, then turned back to Eric. "The payment, as agreed." A leather pouch changed hands, heavy with the clink of silver. Ylva watched her father's eyes light up at the sound, and felt something inside her chest break a little further. 30 pieces of silver, the price of her life, her future, her worth in the eyes of those who should have loved her most. "She has few belongings," Astrid said, stepping forward with the small bundle. "But she is clean, obedient, and her mind is sharp. She knows her letters and numbers, can mend, and—" "Mother," Ylva said quietly, "please." Sten looked between them, his expression unreadable. "We leave within the hour," he said finally. "The roads are treacherous, and I would reach the next settlement before nightfall." As her parents busied themselves with preparations they had clearly been making for days, Ylva found herself alone with her thoughts and the terrible reality of her situation. She had always known she was different now, diminished in the eyes of her community, but she had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that her family's love might prove stronger than their disappointment. The silver arm ring caught the firelight as she turned it on her wrist, and she remembered her grandmother's stories of strong women who had shaped their own destinies. Ylva had once believed she might be such a woman. Now, she felt more like driftwood, carried along by currents beyond her control. When the hour had passed, Sten returned with a horse, a sturdy brown mare with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He had rigged a special saddle with supports that would allow Ylva to ride despite her weakened legs, and she felt a flutter of surprise at his thoughtfulness. "She is called Embla," he said simply. "She will carry you safely." The farewells were brief and awkward. Her mother pressed a small loaf of bread into her hands and whispered a hasty blessing. Her father nodded once and turned away. Her younger brothers, Finn and Olaf, watched from the doorway with wide eyes that held more curiosity than sorrow. As Sten lifted her onto Embla's back with surprising gentleness, Ylva caught sight of her reflection in the cottage window, a pale young woman with gold hair and green eyes, sitting straight back despite everything, still wearing the silver ring that marked her as daughter of a once proud line. "Are you ready?" Sten asked. Swinging up onto his own mount, a massive black stallion that seemed barely large enough to carry him, Ylva looked back at the only home she had ever known, at the family who had traded her away like a broken tool. Then she turned her face toward the unknown road ahead. "I am ready," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. As they rode away from Holtgard, the morning mist swirling around their horses' hooves, Ylva clutched her walking stick and tried not to think about what awaited her in Bjornstad. Instead, she found herself watching the man who rode beside her, this giant warrior who had bought her future with a pouch of silver, yet who had shown her more kindness in 1 hour than her own family had managed in 3 years. The road stretched ahead, white with fresh snow and full of possibilities she could not yet imagine. Behind them, the smoke from Holtgard's chimneys grew thin and disappeared, carrying with it the last threads that bound her to the life she had known. Ylva Eriksdotter was no longer the blacksmith's daughter. What she was becoming, only the journey ahead would tell. The road north from Holtgard wound through dense pine forests where ancient trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow that muffled all sound save the steady clip of horse hooves on frozen ground. For the first hour of their journey, neither Ylva nor Sten spoke. The weight of what had just transpired hung between them like morning fog, thick and uncomfortable. Ylva found herself stealing glances at her companion. Sten Haraldsson rode with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life in the saddle, his massive frame somehow graceful despite his size. His eyes constantly scanned the forest around them, alert for dangers she could not imagine. A great sword hung at his side, its leather-wrapped hilt worn smooth by countless battles, yet he had not once looked at her with the predatory assessment she had feared. The merchant's contract the scroll that had sealed her fate rested in Sten's saddlebags like a coiled snake. She had glimpsed it during the transaction, seen her father's mark beside Sten's, reducing her entire existence to terms of transport and delivery. The memory of it made her stomach turn. When they paused beside a small stream to water the horses, Ylva's composure finally cracked. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a winter wave, and she found herself weeping not the gentle tears of melancholy, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone whose world had shattered completely. "They sold me," she gasped between sobs, clutching her walking stick so tightly her knuckles went white. "Like a broken cart or a lame cow. They could not wait to be rid of me." Sten said nothing at first. He simply stood by his horse, one hand resting on the animal's neck, watching her with those pale blue eyes that seemed to see everything. When her tears finally slowed, he approached slowly, as one might approach a wounded animal. "Your father spoke of hardship," he said quietly. "The harvest was poor. The winter has been harsh. Do not make excuses for them," Ylva said, her voice sharp with pain. "They have 2 strong sons who can work. They chose the easiest path, rid themselves of the burden who could no longer earn her keep." Sten crouched down beside, where she sat on a fallen log, bringing his great height closer to her level. "What skills do you possess?" he asked. The question was not mocking but genuine. Ylva wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, surprised by his interest. "I can read and write in 3 tongues. I know numbers and can keep accounts. Before my accident, I served as scribe to Jarl Magnus, helping to record laws and settle disputes. I can map the stars and navigate by them." She gestured helplessly. "But what use are such things when your legs will not carry you?" "More use than you might think," Sten said, and something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "I cannot read a single rune. I know the feel of a sword and the weight of an axe, but put a scroll before me and I am as helpless as a child." The admission surprised her. Warriors rarely confessed to such limitations, viewing literacy as beneath their notice. "You could learn," she said tentatively. "Perhaps," he agreed. "But for now, I must trust others to read for me. It is not always wise to reveal such dependence to strangers." They resumed their journey. And as the day wore on, Ylva found herself drawn into conversation despite her grief. Sten asked thoughtful questions about her time in the Jarl service, her methods of teaching, the way she had learned to compensate for her physical limitations. His interest seemed genuine, not the polite attention one might pay to cargo that happened to speak. When evening approached, Sten chose their campsite with care, a small clearing protected by overhanging rocks, with access to water and good visibility of the surrounding forest. As he tended to the horses and built their fire, Ylva watched him work with growing puzzlement. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. Sten looked up from where he was arranging stones around the fire pit. "What did you expect? Someone cruder, rougher, the men my father deals with." She stopped, unsure how to continue without giving offense. "Your father deals with men who see a woman with weakened legs as something to be discarded," Sten said bluntly. "I have traveled far enough to know that strength comes in many forms." He helped her settle comfortably against a tree trunk, his touch careful and respectful. When she struggled to position her legs, he waited patiently rather than rushing to assist, seeming to understand that her dignity mattered more than efficiency. As they shared the simple meal of bread and dried meat, Ylva found herself speaking of things she had not shared with anyone since her accident. She told him about the horse that had fallen on her, crushing the bones that had never properly healed. She spoke of the fever that followed, the long months of pain, and the gradual realization that her old life was gone forever. "I was to be married," she said, staring into the fire. "To Harold Eriksson, the tanner's son. He was kind to me, brought me flowers in summer." She touched her silver arm ring unconsciously. "When he learned I would not walk properly again, he found another bride within a month." "Then he was a fool," Sten said simply. The certainty in his voice made her look at him in surprise. "How can you say that? You know nothing of him, or of what I was before." "I know what you are now," Sten replied. "I have watched you today. You do not complain or weep for yourself. You answer questions with intelligence and grace. You sit straight despite discomfort and speak with the bearing of one born to better things." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the darkness. "A man who cannot see worth beyond the movement of legs is indeed a fool." Ylva felt warmth spread through her chest, not from the fire, but from his words. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her as if she had value. "Tell me of this place we travel to," she said. "This Bjornstad. What manner of household requires a woman such as me?" Something flickered across Sten's face, a shadow of discomfort that was there, and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "A merchant family," he said after a pause. "They have need of someone with your learning. And how do you know of this need? Are you a servant in their household?" "No," Sten said. "I am a messenger, a courier. I carry things from one place to another for those who pay my fee." The words were true, she sensed, but incomplete. There was something he was not telling her, some detail he held back. But before she could press further, a sound from the forest made him stiffen the snap of a branch, too sharp and sudden to be natural. "Sleep now," he said quietly, his hand moving to his sword hilt. "We have a long day ahead tomorrow." Ylva settled into her bedroll, but sleep did not come easily. She lay listening to the night sounds of the forest and watching Sten as he kept vigil by the dying fire. He was protecting her, she realized. This giant warrior, who had paid silver for the right to transport her, was treating her not as cargo, but as someone worthy of care. For the first time since leaving Holtgard, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps her future might hold something other than despair. Sten Haraldsson was a mystery, but he was a kind one. Whatever awaited her in Bjornstad, at least the journey there would be bearable. As she finally drifted toward sleep, Ylva did not notice the way Sten's jaw tightened as he stared into the darkness, or the guilt that shadowed his features. She did not see him pull out the merchant's contract and study it by firelight, his expression growing grimmer with each line. If she had, she might have understood that her companion carried secrets as heavy as the silver he had paid for her freedom, secrets that would soon shatter the fragile hope beginning to bloom in her heart. 3 days into their journey, a routine had settled between them like morning frost, quiet but comfortable. Ylva woke each dawn to find Sten already tending the fire, the horses fed and ready. He helped her mount Embla with practiced ease, never rushing or making her feel burdensome. During the long hours on the road, their conversations had grown deeper, more natural. It was on the 4th evening that Ylva first revealed the true extent of her knowledge. They had made camp in a grove of ancient oaks, and as darkness settled over the land, she tilted her face toward the star-scattered sky. "There," she said, pointing to a cluster of bright points. "The hunter's belt, and there, the swan's wing." Her finger traced invisible lines between the stars. "From their position, we are traveling true north, perhaps a degree toward the eastern mountains." Sten looked up from where he was checking their supplies. "You can read the stars?" "Jarl Magnus required his scribes to know navigation," Ylva explained. "Ships depend on such knowledge, and even land travelers can benefit." She pulled a piece of bark from their fire pile and, using a charred stick, began sketching. "See here, this is how the stars move through the seasons. In summer, the hunter rises there, but now, in deep winter, he stands guard over the northern approaches." The bark filled with her careful drawing star charts that showed not just the positions of celestial bodies, but their movements through the year. Each mark was precise, placed from memory with the confidence of someone who had studied under masters. Sten examined her work with growing amazement. "This is remarkable. You drew this from memory alone?" "Knowledge unused grows stale," Ylva said simply. "I practice these skills to keep them sharp, even when they seem to have no purpose." "They have purpose now," Sten said, settling beside her. "I have been to many lands, but I navigate by landmarks and the wisdom of local guides. To carry such knowledge in one's head, it would be useful in places where guides cannot be trusted." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "You speak as one who has found himself in such places." "I have wandered far," Sten admitted. "Not all roads are safe. Not all guides are honest." Over the following days, their relationship shifted. Sten began asking Ylva to verify their direction, to explain the logic behind her star reading. In return, she grew bolder in her curiosity about his past, though he remained guarded about details. "You said you cannot read," she said one afternoon as they rested beside a frozen stream. "Yet you speak like an educated man. Your words are measured, thoughtful." "Learning and reading are not the same," Sten replied. "I have listened to many wise people speak. I remember what serves me well. Would you like to learn? To read, I mean." Sten was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then he nodded slowly. "If you would teach me." That evening, Ylva began his first lesson using the rune stones they encountered along the ancient road. The weathered markers bore inscriptions in the old tongue, warnings about dangerous paths, memorials to fallen heroes, directions to distant settlements. Most travelers passed them without a second glance, but Ylva treated each one as a classroom. "This rune means danger," she explained, tracing the carved symbol with her finger. "And this one, water." Together, they warn of treacherous river crossings ahead. Sten studied the markings with the same intensity he brought to reading tracks or weather signs. His questions were practical, which runes appeared most frequently: how to distinguish similar symbols, the difference between old script and newer markings. "You are a quick student," Ylva observed as he correctly identified a warning about wolves. "Most people struggle with the basic forms for months." "I have good reason to learn," Sten said. "A man who must trust others to read for him is often at their mercy." As his skills improved, so did their conversations. Ylva found herself sharing stories from her time in the Jarl's court, the complex legal cases she had helped resolve, the visiting scholars who had taught her advanced calculations, the maps she had copied of distant lands. "I was respected there," she said wistfully. "My mind was valued more than my appearance or my ability to tend house. When I gave counsel, people listened." "They should listen still," Sten said. "Wisdom does not reside in one's legs." His words warmed her, but they also highlighted the painful contrast with her current situation. "Tell me truly," she said one evening as they studied the stars together, "this merchant family in Bjornstad, what have you been told of their need for someone like me?" Again, that flicker of discomfort crossed Sten's features. "They have business dealings that require careful record-keeping," he said carefully. "Your skills would serve them well." "And what business is that?" "Trade," Sten said. "Import and export of goods from southern lands." Something about his answers felt rehearsed, as if he had prepared them in advance. But before Ylva could probe deeper, their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of horses approaching on the road behind them. Sten was on his feet instantly, his hand on his sword. "Quickly," he said, helping Ylva to her feet. "We leave the road." They led their horses into the dense undergrowth, Sten supporting Ylva as she navigated the uneven ground with her walking stick. From their hiding place, they watched three riders thunder past rough men with hard faces and weapons openly displayed. "Raiders," Sten said grimly once the sound had faded. "There have been reports of attacks on travelers, isolated farmsteads burned, goods stolen. Are we in danger?" "Not if we are careful," Sten assured her. "But we must be more watchful now. The roads are not as safe as they once were." That night, as Sten kept watch while she slept, Ylva found herself thinking about the changes in their relationship. 3 days ago she had been cargo, a burden to be transported and delivered. Now, Sten sought her advice on navigation, valued her knowledge, treated her as a partner rather than a package. For the first time since her accident, she felt useful again. Her mind, at least, remained sharp and valued. Whatever awaited her in Bjornstad, this journey was teaching her that she still had worth if only she could find others who recognized it. As sleep claimed her, Ylva did not notice Sten pulling out a piece of parchment and studying it by firelight. The merchant's contract seemed to weigh heavier in his hands each day, its true contents, a secret that grew more burdensome with every moment of Ylva's trust. The girl, sleeping peacefully beside their dying fire, had no idea that the merchant family she was destined for operated a very different kind of business than the one she imagined. Sten's jaw tightened as he folded the contract away, knowing that each day of their journey brought them closer to a reckoning he was no longer certain he could face. By the end of their first week together, Sten could recognize nearly 24 runes and string them into simple words. Ylva proved to be a patient teacher, never mocking his struggles or showing frustration when he confused similar symbols. Their lessons took place each evening by firelight, using whatever ancient stones they encountered along the increasingly remote path. "This marking speaks of a battle fought here long ago," Ylva explained, running her fingers over weathered carvings on a moss-covered boulder. "See how the runes tell the story? Here fell Bjorn Ironarm, defending the northern pass against southern raiders." Sten traced the symbols carefully, his large fingers surprisingly gentle on the ancient stone. "The raiders came from the south even then." "Always there have been those who take rather than trade," Ylva said. "But these stones also mark safe paths, sources of fresh water, places where travelers can find shelter." She pointed to a series of smaller runes. "This cluster means sanctuary ahead, likely a temple or protected grove." As they traveled deeper into the wilderness, their conversations grew more personal. Sten spoke of his wandering life, though he remained vague about his origins and the reasons for his rootless existence. "I had a home once," he admitted one evening, as they shared their simple meal. "Family, obligations, a name that carried weight in my father's hall." "What changed?" Ylva asked gently. Sten stared into the fire for a long moment. I made choices that brought shame to my bloodline. Choices that meant I could no longer claim the name I was born to. What manner of choices? The kind that cannot be undone, Sten said simply. I have been Sten the Wanderer for so many years now that I barely remember being anyone else. Ylva sensed the pain beneath his words. Sometimes a new name can be a gift, she offered. A chance to become who we choose to be, rather than who others expect us to be. Something flickered in Sten's eyes at her words, but he only nodded and changed the subject. Their bond deepened through shared hardships. When Ylva's legs grew stiff and painful from long hours in the saddle, Sten would stop without her asking, helping her stretch and walk short distances with her birch stick. When he struggled with a particularly complex rune sequence, she would patiently work through it with him until understanding dawned. You were truly valued in the Jarl's court? Sten asked one afternoon as they studied a stone marker that detailed ancient trading agreements. I was, Ylva said, and for once the memory brought more warmth than pain. Jarl Magnus called me his silver-tongued scribe. I could untangle the most complex legal disputes, find precedent in the old laws for new situations. She smiled sadly. I thought knowledge would always be enough, that wisdom would protect me from the world's cruelties. Knowledge is still power, Sten said, even if others are too blind to see it. That evening, troubling news reached them. They had stopped at a small trading post, little more than a fortified cabin where travelers could purchase supplies and shelter. The keeper, a grizzled man named Olaf, brought word that chilled them both. Farmstead burned 3 days ago, he reported, shaking his head grimly. The Eriksson place, 2 leagues south of here. Family slaughtered, livestock stolen. The raiders grow bolder. Ylva felt ice form in her stomach. Eriksson. Was the family name Harold Eriksson? Aye, that was the father's name. You knew them? Harold was. Ylva swallowed hard. He was to be my husband once. Olaf looked at her with new interest, then at Sten. You'd best be careful on the road ahead. These raiders seem to know which farms hold valuables, which travelers carry coin. Some say they have inside knowledge. That night, as they made camp in a defensible position among tall rocks, Sten seemed more troubled than usual. He checked and rechecked their surroundings, his warrior instincts clearly alert to danger. The raiders trouble you greatly, Ylva observed. They should trouble anyone with sense, Sten replied. But you are right. There is something about their methods that concerns me. He settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his large frame. They strike with too much precision, too much knowledge of their targets. You think someone provides them information? It is possible. Someone who knows the roads, who can identify profitable targets. Sten's jaw tightened. Such betrayal makes every stranger a potential threat. Ylva studied his profile in the firelight, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand never strayed far from his weapon. You have dealt with betrayal yourself. Every wanderer learns to expect it, Sten said, but his tone suggested deeper wounds. Despite the growing danger, Ylva found herself treasuring these quiet conversations. Sten listened to her thoughts with genuine interest, challenged her ideas respectfully, shared his own experiences without condescension. It had been so long since anyone had treated her as an intellectual equal that she had almost forgotten what such respect felt like. "Tell me of your dreams," Sten said suddenly, surprising her with the personal question. "My dreams? What did you hope for? Before your accident? What future did you imagine for yourself?" Ylva considered carefully. "I dreamed of establishing a school," she said finally. "A place where children could learn not just their letters, but numbers, star reading, the old laws and histories. Boys and girls together, for knowledge serves both equally well." "A worthy dream," Sten said. "Why could you not pursue it still? Who would send their children to learn from a crippled woman?" Who would respect the authority of someone who cannot even stand without support? Someone wise enough to value the mind over the body, Sten replied firmly. Such people exist, though they may be rarer than they should be. His faith in her possibilities stirred something Ylva had thought, dead hope for a future beyond mere survival. "And what of your dreams?" she asked. "What does a wanderer hope for?" Sten was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. When he spoke, his words were barely above a whisper. "I dream of redemption," he said, "of finding a way to balance the scales of my past mistakes, of becoming worthy of the name I once bore." Ylva reached out, impulsively, her hand covering his where it rested on his knee. "Perhaps we both seek the same thing," she said softly. "A chance to become who we truly are, rather than what the world has named us." Sten looked down at her small hand on his, and something shifted in his expression. For a moment, the careful walls he maintained seemed to crack, revealing depths of longing and pain that made Ylva's heart ache. Then the moment passed, and he gently withdrew his hand, though not unkindly. "Sleep now," he said. "Tomorrow brings us closer to our destination." As Ylva settled into her bedroll, she could not shake the feeling that they were approaching more than just a physical destination. Something was building between them, an understanding, a connection that went deeper than the simple arrangement that had brought them together. She did not yet know that her growing trust in Sten would soon be tested by a revelation that would shatter everything she had come to believe about their journey. The smoke was visible from 3 miles away, a dark column rising against the pale winter sky like a funeral pyre. Sten reined in his horse and studied the distant signal with grim recognition. "Another farmstead," he said quietly. Ylva shaded her eyes against the morning glare, her heart sinking as she made out the orange flicker of flames at the smoke's base. "Should we not avoid it? If raiders are still there, the fire burns too freely," Sten replied, already turning his mount toward the smoke. "Raiders do not linger after they strike, but there may be survivors who need aid." The scene that greeted them was one of devastation. The farmhouse had been reduced to a smoking shell, its timber frame blackened and collapsed. Outbuildings lay in ruins, livestock scattered or slaughtered. But it was the small group of survivors, huddled in what remained of the barn, that drew their immediate attention. An older woman clutched 2 young children to her sides, all 3 of them streaked with soot and shaking from cold and shock. A middle-aged man sat propped against a post, blood seeping through crude bandages around his shoulder. "Peace," Sten called out as they approached, raising his empty hands. "We mean no harm. We saw the smoke and came to help." The wounded man struggled to rise, wincing with pain. "Strangers, you take a risk stopping here. The raiders may return." Sten dismounted and helped Ylva down from Embla, his touch gentle despite his urgency. "When did they strike?" "Just after dawn," the woman answered, her voice hollow with grief. "They came like wolves, silent and swift. My husband tried to fight them." She gestured toward a still form lying beneath a torn cloak near the barn's entrance. Ylva felt the familiar tug of helplessness that came whenever she encountered suffering she could not ease. But as she looked at the traumatized survivors, her mind began to work in the methodical way that had once served her so well in the Jarls. "Court. How many raiders were there?" she asked, settling onto a wooden crate to bring herself to their level. "Did they say anything, give any indication of where they came from, or where they planned to go next?" The wounded man, Gunnar, he introduced himself, looked surprised to be questioned by a woman, but answered readily enough. 8 men, maybe 10. They spoke little, but what I heard was in the northern tongue. They took our stored grain, our remaining livestock, the silver we had saved for spring planting. Did they seem to know where to look for valuables? Ylva pressed. Or did they search randomly? They knew, Gunnar said grimly. Went straight to where we kept our savings hidden. Even found the extra food stores in the cellar. Ylva exchanged a meaningful look with Sten. Someone told them what to look for. As Sten tended Gunnar's wounds with practiced efficiency, Ylva organized the survivors' immediate needs. She inventoried what supplies they had salvaged, calculated how long their food would last, and began planning their options for shelter and safety. "The nearest settlement is Thornvale, half a day's walk east," she told them. "But you cannot make that journey in your current condition, especially with the children. We have relatives there." The woman Astrid, she was called, said hopefully. "My brother Olaf has a farm. He would take us in. Then we must get you there safely," Ylva said with quiet authority. "But not until Gunnar can travel without worsening his injury." As she spoke, organizing and planning with natural command, Ylva felt something awakening within her that had been dormant since her accident. The sharp focus of her mind, the ability to see problems clearly and devise solutions, these gifts remained intact, perhaps even strengthened by her trials. Sten watched her work with growing admiration. She questioned the survivors about the terrain between here and Thornvale, sketched rough maps in the dirt, calculated travel times based on Gunnar's limitations and the children's endurance. Within an hour, she had devised a practical plan for getting them to safety. "You think like a military commander," he observed when they had a moment apart. "I learned from the best," Ylva replied. Jarl Magnus often said that the skills needed to resolve complex legal disputes were the same ones required for planning campaigns or managing resources. She paused, then added more softly, "I had forgotten how good it felt to be useful." That evening, as they made camp in the ruins of the farmstead to guard the survivors through the night, Ylva made a discovery that changed everything. While searching through the debris for anything salvageable, her fingers found something small and metallic, buried in the ash. She drew it out carefully, brushing away the soot to reveal a bronze medallion bearing the seal of Jarl Magnus, the same seal she had once worn as his trusted scribe. Her breath caught in her throat as memories flooded back. "What have you found?" Sten asked, approaching with an armload of firewood. Ylva held up the medallion, her hand trembling slightly. "This was mine," she whispered. "I thought it lost when I fell from the horse. I searched everywhere, but—" She looked up at him with wonder. How could it be here, so far from home? Sten studied the medallion, and something flickered in his expression. "Perhaps it fell from your belongings during the journey. These things have a way of traveling." But Ylva was already shaking her head. "No. I lost this 3 years ago, the day of my accident. I remember searching for it while the healer tended my legs." She clutched the medallion to her chest. "This means something, some design of fate that I cannot yet understand." The discovery seemed to kindle something in her spirit. That night, as she told stories to comfort the frightened children, her voice carried a strength and confidence that had been missing for years. She spoke of heroes who overcame impossible odds, of wise women who saved kingdoms through their cleverness, of the power of knowledge and determination over brute force. "You are different tonight," Sten observed when the survivors had finally settled into exhausted sleep. "I feel different," Ylva admitted. "Finding this seal, it reminds me of who I was, who I perhaps still am, beneath the shame and self-doubt." "And who is that?" Ylva looked at him in the firelight, her green eyes bright with newfound purpose. "Someone who does not accept defeat easily. Someone who believes that problems exist to be solved, not simply endured." She turned the bronze medallion over in her hands, feeling its familiar weight. Tomorrow they would escort the survivors to safety. But beyond that, questions were beginning to form in her mind, questions about her destiny in Bjornstad, about the man who had bought her service, about her own capacity for shaping her future. For the first time since leaving Holtgard, Ylva began to wonder if she might have more choices than she had believed. The girl who had once advised Jarls and taught scribes was stirring to life again, and she found herself curious to see what that woman might accomplish when given the chance. The bronze seal caught the firelight, and Ylva smiled. Perhaps her story was far from over. The journey to Thornvale took 2 days, with frequent stops to accommodate Gunnar's injury and the children's short legs. Ylva orchestrated their movement like a seasoned commander, choosing rest stops with strategic care and keeping morale high with stories and gentle encouragement. Sten found himself following her directions without question, recognizing natural leadership when he saw it. On the second evening, as they camped within sight of Thornvale's welcoming lights, Sten finally gave voice to thoughts that had been building for days. "You were not meant for the life your family planned for you," he said as they sat, apart from the sleeping survivors. Ylva looked up from where she was checking Gunnar's bandages one final time. "What do you mean? Watching you these past days, the way you take command, solve problems, inspire others to action, you were born to lead, not to be hidden away as someone's burden." The words stirred something deep in Ylva's chest. "My father would say that leadership requires strength of body as well as mind." "Your father is wrong," Sten said with quiet conviction. "I have served under men who could swing a sword with devastating force, but could not think their way out of the simplest predicament. I have seen strong men make foolish choices that cost lives, while wise counselors saved kingdoms with nothing but words and clever planning." He gestured toward the sleeping survivors. "These people look to you now, not to me, though I carry the weapons. They trust your judgment because they recognize wisdom when they encounter it." Ylva felt tears prick her eyes. "You speak as if I have choices beyond Bjornstad." Something dark crossed Sten's features at the mention of their destination. He reached across the small space between them and took her hands in his massive ones. "Perhaps you have more choices than you know." The touch sent warmth racing up her arms. In the firelight, with his weathered face softened by concern, Sten looked less like the intimidating warrior who had purchased her service and more like a man struggling with his own demons. "Tell me about yourself," Ylva said impulsively. "Your real story, not the carefully chosen words you have given me so far." Sten was quiet for so long, she thought he would refuse. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "I was born Sten Eriksson, youngest son of a powerful Jarl in the Western Territories. My father was a great warrior, my brothers followed in his footsteps. But he stared into the fire. "I was always different, larger than others. Yes, but also more thoughtful. I preferred books to battles, negotiation to warfare. Those are hardly faults. My father thought otherwise. When I reached manhood, he arranged for me to prove myself in combat. A raid against a neighboring clan over some ancient grievance." Sten's voice grew heavy with old pain. "I went because I had no choice. But when the moment came to strike down an unarmed elder who reminded me of my grandfather, I could not do it." Ylva squeezed his hands encouragingly. "My hesitation cost us the element of surprise. Men died who might have lived. My father called me a coward, said I had brought shame to our bloodline. He gave me a choice: redeem myself by leading the next raid with twice the violence, or leave and never return. You chose exile. I chose to become someone I could respect," Sten said simply. "I took my father's axe, this one I carry, and walked away from everything I had ever known." He looked down at their joined hands. "I told myself it was honor that drove me, but sometimes I wonder if it was not simply cowardice after all." Ylva studied his face in the firelight. "The coward would have stayed and done as he was told. You chose the harder path. Did I? Or did I simply run from responsibility?" "You have spent years helping strangers," Ylva pointed out, "protecting travelers, carrying messages, serving as escort for those who need safe passage. How is that running from responsibility?" Sten lifted his gaze to hers. "Perhaps because some of those I have served do not deserve protection. Some of the messages I have carried, the arrangements I have facilitated." He stopped himself. "A man must eat. Not all employment comes with clean hands." There was something in his tone that made Ylva's stomach tighten with unease. "What are you not telling me about Bjornstad?" The question hung between them like a blade. Sten's jaw worked as if he were wrestling with words that would not come. Finally, he spoke, but not to answer her question. "I have never met anyone like you," he said instead. "Your courage, your intelligence, the way you refuse to be diminished by others' limitations, you inspire me to want to be better than I am." The admission was so raw, so honest, that it took Ylva's breath away. She saw in his pale eyes not just attraction, but something deeper, a longing for redemption that matched her own need for purpose. "Sten," she whispered, and leaned forward to touch his cheek. He closed his eyes at her touch, as if the simple contact caused him pain. "You deserve so much more than—" He stopped, caught himself. "You deserve to choose your own fate." "Then help me choose," Ylva said. "Whatever awaits us in Bjornstad, whatever arrangement has been made, help me find a different path." When Sten opened his eyes, they were bright, with unshed tears. "You do not know what you ask. I know that for the first time in 3 years, I feel alive again. I know that you see me as I truly am, not as a broken thing to be, discarded. And I know that whatever is growing between us is worth fighting for." Sten pulled away gently, but the loss of contact felt like a physical wound. "We should rest," he said. "Tomorrow we reach Thornvale, and after that, we face whatever comes together." Ylva finished firmly. The next morning, they escorted the survivors into Thornvale, where Astrid's brother Olaf welcomed them with open arms and grateful tears. As they prepared to continue their own journey, Gunnar pressed a small leather pouch into Sten's hands. "Payment for your kindness," he said. "It is not much, but honest coin." Sten accepted the payment with grace, but Ylva noticed how his face tightened as he tucked it away. Another reminder of the mercenary nature of his work, perhaps, another weight to add to whatever guilt already burdened him. As they rode away from Thornvale, Ylva felt the bronze medallion warm against her chest, where she wore it beneath her cloak. The symbol of the former authority had returned to her just when she was beginning to reclaim her strength. It felt like a sign, a promise that her story was far from over. Behind them, smoke still rose from the burned farmstead. Ahead lay Bjornstad, and whatever fate awaited her there. But beside her rode a man who saw her true worth, who valued her mind over her limitations. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as Ylva the Wise, not Ylva the Broken. The distinction, she was beginning to understand, would make all the difference. 3 days beyond Thornvale, the truth came to light in the cruelest possible way. They had stopped at a crossroads inn, a ramshackle establishment that catered to traders and travelers willing to pay for warmth and safety in numbers. Sten had been reluctant to stop there, but a winter storm was building on the horizon, and even he admitted they needed shelter. The common room was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. Merchants huddled over their ales, speaking in low voices about road conditions and bandit activity. Ylva sat beside the fire, grateful for its warmth, while Sten negotiated with the innkeeper for a room. It was then that she overheard the conversation that shattered her world. 2 men at the next table were speaking in voices they thought were private, but Ylva's sharp ears caught their words clearly. They were discussing business, the kind of business that made her blood run cold. The Northman with the crippled woman, one was saying, "He is bound for Corvin's establishment in Bjornstad, is he not?" "Aye," his companion replied. "Fine piece, even with the useless legs. Corvin pays well for the educated ones. They fetch higher prices from certain customers who prefer their pleasures seasoned with conversation." Ylva's hands began to shake. Corvin's establishment. Higher prices, pleasures seasoned with conversation. The Haraldson fellow delivered 2 others this past year. The first man, continued, always brings quality goods. This one should earn him a handsome commission. The truth hit Ylva like a physical blow. She was not being taken to a merchant family that needed a learned woman for honest work. She was being delivered to a brothel, sold into a life of degradation that would make her family's rejection seem like kindness by comparison. And Sten knew, had known from the beginning. She sat frozen by the fire, her mind reeling as the pieces fell into place. His reluctance to discuss their destination, his carefully evasive answers about the merchant family, the guilt that shadowed his features whenever she spoke hopefully of her future. When Sten returned from arranging their lodging, he found Ylva staring into the flames with eyes that had gone completely dead. "What is wrong?" he asked, settling beside her. "Tell me about Corvin's establishment," she said quietly. Sten went rigid. Around them, the inn's common room buzzed with ordinary conversation, but between them, silence stretched like a chasm. "Ylva, tell me," she repeated, her voice still eerily calm. "Tell me about the merchant family that has need of my learning. Tell me about the work that awaits me in Bjornstad." Sten's face had gone pale. He glanced around the room, then leaned closer to her. "Not here. Let us speak privately." "No." Ylva turned to face him fully, and he flinched at the cold fury in her green eyes. "Here. Now. Tell me the truth you have hidden behind your kindness and your gentle words." Sten looked as if she had struck him. "It is not what you think, is it not?" Ylva's voice remained deadly quiet, but her words cut like blades. "Am I not being delivered to a brothel? Am I not cargo to be sold to the highest bidder for their pleasure?" The admission hung between them, and Sten's silence was answer enough. "You knew," Ylva whispered, and now her voice cracked with pain. "From the very beginning, you knew what my family had sold me to. You let me hope. You let me trust you. You let me—" She could not finish the sentence, could not speak of the feelings that had grown between them, now poisoned beyond redemption. "Let me explain," Sten said desperately. "It began as you say, but things have changed." "Changed?" Ylva laughed, a bitter sound that made several patrons look their way. "What has changed? The destination, the contract, the silver that bought my future." She reached into her cloak and withdrew the bronze medallion, the seal she had worn so proudly as evidence of her former worth. With deliberate slowness, she set it on the table between them. "I thought this was a sign," she said. "A promise that my story was not over, that I might reclaim something of who I used to be." She looked at Sten with eyes that held no warmth. "But it was just another lie, was it not? Another way to make me compliant on the journey to my destruction." "No," Sten said fiercely. "That medallion came from your belongings. I had nothing to do with placing it in the farmstead ruins." "Your belongings?" Ylva's voice rose slightly. "Then you have been carrying it all along? A trophy from my family's deception?" Sten reached across the table as if to take her hands, but she pulled away sharply. "I was hired to escort you, yes. But I swear to you, things have changed. I no longer intend to complete that contract. Because you pity me? Because you have grown fond of your cargo? Because I love you," Sten said simply. The words should have brought her joy. Instead, they felt like another betrayal. "Love," she repeated slowly. "You speak of love while delivering me to hell." "I speak of love because it is what has changed everything," Sten insisted. 3 weeks ago, you were a contract to fulfill. But you, your courage, your intelligence, the way you refuse to be broken by the world's cruelty, you have shown me what real strength looks like." Ylva stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her words were measured and final. "You want to know what real strength looks like? It looks like this." She rose from the table with careful dignity, using her walking stick to steady herself. "I will not go to Bjornstad. I will not be delivered to Corvin or any other buyer. And I will not travel another mile with a man who could look me in the eye and lie about my fate for 3 weeks. "Ylva, please," She turned away from him and addressed the room at large. "Is there anyone here traveling south who would accept a passenger? I have skills to offer in payment. I can read and write, keep accounts, tend the sick." Several men looked up with interest, though whether at her offer or her obvious distress was unclear. A traveling merchant raised his hand tentatively. "I journey toward the southern territories," he said. "I could use someone who knows letters to help with my records." "Then we have an agreement," Ylva said, not looking back at Sten. "I will gather my belongings." As she moved toward the stairs, Sten caught her arm gently. "You cannot travel with strangers. The roads are dangerous, the weather uncertain. At least, let me protect you until..." "Until what?" Ylva turned to face him one last time. "Until you deliver me to a different buyer? Until you find a way to profit from my misery with a cleaner conscience? Until I can find a way to undo the harm I have done," Sten said desperately. "Give me a chance to make this right." Ylva looked into his pale blue eyes, eyes she had come to trust, to find comfort in, even to love, and felt her heart break completely. "The harm is not in the destination," she said softly. "The harm is in the journey taken under false pretenses. You cannot undo the betrayal. You cannot unknow what you knew, and I cannot trust you again." She pulled free of his grip and climbed the stairs to gather her few possessions, leaving Sten sitting alone at the table with the bronze medallion gleaming between his empty hands. Around them, the inn's normal bustle resumed, but for Sten, the world had gone completely silent. When Ylva descended again 20 minutes later, her face was composed, but her eyes remained dead. She had tied back her golden hair severely and wrapped herself in her traveling cloak like armor. The walking stick in her hand seemed less like a support and more like a weapon. "I am ready," she told the merchant, who had been watching the drama with obvious discomfort. As they prepared to leave, Ylva paused beside Sten's table one final time. "You said you sought redemption," she said quietly, "that you wanted to become worthy of the name you once bore. Here is your chance. Let me go." Sten looked up at her, his face etched with anguish. "If I let you go with strangers, I may never see you again." "Good," Ylva said simply. "Perhaps that would be best for both of us." She walked away without looking back, leaving Sten alone with his guilt, his gustju, father's axe, and the terrible weight of choices that could never be undone. 3 days had passed since Ylva left the inn with the merchant Thorstein, and Sten had been following them at a distance ever since. He told himself he was ensuring her safety, but the truth was simpler and more selfish. He could not bear to let her disappear from his life entirely. The merchant had proven to be exactly what he seemed, a middle-aged trader more interested in profit than propriety. He treated Ylva courteously enough, valuing her literacy skills for his ledgers, but Sten could see the calculating looks he cast her way. More troubling were the 2 armed men who traveled with them, ostensibly as guards, but clearly familiar with rougher work than simple caravan protection. On the 3rd evening, Sten's worst fears were realized. He watched from the concealment of a rocky outcrop as Thorstein's party made camp in a small valley, their fire bright against the gathering darkness. From his vantage point, he could see Ylva helping to prepare their simple meal, her movements careful and dignified despite the circumstances. The trouble began when she retired to her bedroll near the fire's edge. One of the guards, a brutish man named Crippled, approached her with intentions that required no interpretation. Even from a distance, Sten could see Ylva's body stiffen with alarm as the man loomed over her. "Come now, girl," Crippeld's voice carried clearly in the still air. "Thorstein says you're bound for the southern territories with nothing but your wits to protect you. A woman alone needs friends, allies who might watch over her interests." "I require no such friendship," Ylva replied, her voice steady despite the obvious threat. "Please return to your post." Crippled laughed and reached down to grasp her arm. "You misunderstand the nature of our arrangement. Thorstein owes us wages, and he's short of coin. But he mentioned you might be willing to work off some of his debt." Ylva tried. to pull away, but Kveld's grip tightened. "Thorstein!" she called toward the merchant, who was conspicuously studying his ledgers by the fire. "Call off your man." "Afraid I can't do that," Thorstein replied without looking up. "Business is business. A man has to pay his debts one way or another." It was then that Sten realized the horrible truth. This had been planned from the beginning. Thorstein had offered to help Ylva not from kindness, but because he saw profit in her desperation. The betrayal was even worse than the brothel she had fled, because this time she had walked willingly into the trap. Sten was moving before conscious thought took hold. He descended from his hiding place like an avalanche, his great sword singing as it cleared its sheath. The firelight caught the blade's edge as he stepped into the circle of light, his massive frame casting shadows that danced like demons across the rocky ground. "Remove your hands from the lady," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of cold promise that wise men feared. Kveld spun toward the threat, his own weapon appearing in his fist with practiced speed. "Well, well, if it isn't the Northman himself, come to collect your property?" "I have come to offer you a choice," Sten replied. "Release her and ride away with your lives, or face the consequences of your actions." The second guard, a lean man named Ulf, flanked Sten with predatory grace, 2 against 1 giant. "I like those odds." "Then you have never seen me fight," Sten said simply. Ylva struggled to her feet, using her walking stick for support. Her face showed no relief at Sten's arrival, only a weary recognition that one betrayer had been replaced by another. "I want no part of this," she said clearly. "Let me gather my belongings and go." "You're not going anywhere," Kveld snarled, tightening his grip on her arm. "We have an arrangement to honor." That was when something fundamental shifted in Sten's expression. The careful control he maintained, the measured responses of a disciplined warrior, all of it fell away like shed skin. What remained was something older and far more dangerous. "Your arrangement," Sten said, his voice now carrying the echo of winter storms, "is with me." The fight erupted with explosive violence. Kveld thrust his blade toward Sten's chest, expecting the big man's size to slow his reactions. Instead, Sten flowed around the attack like water, his sword taking Kveld's head from his shoulders in a single, economical stroke. Ulf fared no better. The lean guard's speed meant nothing against a warrior who moved with the precision of falling snow and struck with the force of an avalanche. Within moments, both men lay dead in the dirt, their blood steaming in the cold air. Thorstein, who had watched the slaughter with growing terror, threw himself to his knees. "Peace, Lord. I meant no offense. The woman is yours by right." "The woman," Sten said, cleaning his blade on Kveld's cloak, "belongs to no one but herself." He turned to Ylva, who had watched the carnage with steady eyes. She showed no fear of him, only a tired acceptance of the violence that seemed to follow her wherever she went. "You are safe now," Sten said gently. "Am I?" Ylva asked. "Or have I simply exchanged one captor for another? I am not your captor. I never was, though I know my actions have made that distinction meaningless to you." Ylva studied him for a long moment. Around them, the night pressed close, full of dangers both seen and unseen. Thorstein cowered by the dying fire, and the bodies of his men lay sprawled in the dirt like broken dolls. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why follow me? Why not simply ride to Bjornstad and collect whatever payment awaited you there?" Sten sheathed his sword and approached her slowly, his hands open and visible. "Because somewhere along our journey, the woman I was hired to transport became the woman I could not bear to lose." "Pretty words," Ylva said bitterly, "but words are all they are. You have shown me what you are capable of when pressed: violence, death, the kind of solutions that come from a sword rather than wisdom." "Yes," Sten agreed simply. "I am what the world has made me. But you are what I could become, given the chance. You solve problems with your mind, protect people with your knowledge, lead through inspiration rather than fear." He gestured toward the dead men. This is all I know how to do. But with you, I learned there might be another way." Despite herself, Ylva felt her anger wavering. She had seen him these past weeks, had witnessed the gentleness beneath his warrior's exterior. But trust, once shattered, was not easily rebuilt. "What do you propose?" she asked. "That we continue our journey as if nothing has changed? That I forget your deception and trust you with my future once again?" "I propose," Sten said carefully, "that we abandon all previous arrangements and forge a new one, not as escort and cargo, but as partners seeking a different path." From her cloak, Ylva drew forth a piece of bark covered with her careful drawings, a detailed map showing their route north, marked with safe roads, dangerous passes, and settlements that might welcome travelers. She had been working on it during their journey, using her navigation skills to chart their progress. "This is my battle plan," she said, holding up the bark. "Not for war, but for survival. I have marked 3 different routes south that avoid the main roads where bandits wait. I have identified settlements where my skills might earn honest shelter, and calculated how long our supplies will last under different conditions." Sten studied her precise markings with growing admiration. "You planned this escape carefully." "I plan to survive," Ylva corrected, "with or without help." She looked at the map, then back at him. "But I admit that survival would be easier with a capable warrior to guard against threats like these." She gestured toward the dead guards. "Then you will accept my protection?" "I will accept your partnership," Ylva said firmly. "Not as my owner or guardian, but as an equal ally in whatever comes next." Sten nodded slowly. "And where do we go? What destination serves us both?" Ylva rolled up her bark map carefully, her movements deliberate and thoughtful. "There is a place I have heard of, a settlement called Ironhold in the eastern mountains. They say it is governed by merit rather than birth, where a person's worth is measured by their contributions rather than their bloodline or physical prowess. A place where a wise woman might establish a school, perhaps," Ylva said, "and where a warrior seeking redemption might find honest work, protecting something worth protecting." As she spoke, organizing their new alliance with the same methodical precision she brought to all challenges, Sten felt something he had not experienced in years: hope, not the desperate hope of a man fleeing his past, but the steady confidence of someone building toward a worthwhile future. Around them, the night was full of dangers. Behind them lay betrayal and broken trust. Ahead stretched uncertain roads and unknown challenges. But for the first time since leaving Holtgard, both Ylva and Sten faced the future as people who had chosen their own path. Whatever came next, they would meet it together, not as owner and property, but as partners, united by shared purpose and hard-won understanding. The battle plan was drawn. The alliance was forged. All that remained was to test both against whatever trials awaited them in the darkness ahead. The raiders found them 2 days later, just as Ylva's carefully drawn map had predicted they would. She had chosen their route with mathematical precision, a narrow valley that offered only one approach, with high ground on either side and a swift-running stream at their backs. When the thundering of horse hooves echoed off the rocky walls, announcing the arrival of at least a dozen mounted warriors, Ylva was ready. "Remember," she called to Sten as he checked his weapons, "we are not trying to win a battle. We are trying to survive long enough to escape." Sten nodded grimly, his great sword gleaming in the afternoon light. But his eyes were on the crude horn Ylva held in her hands, a simple instrument carved from an ox bone that she had purchased from a herder 2 days prior. It seemed an unlikely weapon against armed raiders, but he had learned to trust her unconventional thinking. The first riders appeared at the valley's mouth, their leader a scarred giant, nearly as large as Sten himself. They wore mismatched armor and carried weapons that spoke of many victories over defenseless prey. These were not desperate men driven to banditry by hard times. These were predators who had made cruelty their profession. "You there," the leader called, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Stand and deliver. Your goods. We are not unreasonable men. Cooperate, and you may leave with your lives." Ylva urged Embla forward, positioning herself where the raiders could see her clearly. Sten started to object, but she silenced him with a sharp gesture. "I am Ylva of Holtgard," she called back, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Daughter of Eric the blacksmith, former scribe to Jarl Magnus the lawgiver. I propose a different arrangement." The leader laughed, a harsh sound that spoke of too many easy victories. "A crippled woman wishes to negotiate? This should prove amusing." "Indeed it should," Ylva agreed calmly, "for I offer you something far more valuable than the few coins we carry." She raised the horn to her lips and blew a single, clear note that seemed to hang in the air far longer than nature should have allowed. The sound bounced off the valley walls, multiplying and growing until it seemed as if a dozen horns were calling from the heights above. The raiders looked around nervously, scanning the ridgelines for signs of hidden archers. "Clever," their leader said, though his confidence had wavered slightly. "But tricks with echoes will not save you if you have nothing to offer." "I offer you information," Ylva said. "I know who has been telling you which farms to raid, which traders carry the most gold, which routes avoid the Jarl's patrols." This got their attention. Several riders exchanged meaningful glances. "Speak plainly, woman." "I will speak plainly to your leader," Ylva replied. "Have him come forward alone, and I will share what I know." The scarred giant urged his horse forward, stopping just outside sword range. "I am Thorvald, Blood Axe. Speak your piece." Ylva studied him with the same analytical gaze she had once used to evaluate complex legal cases. "You have an informant in the Jarl's court," she said matter-of-factly. "Someone who knows the movements of merchants and the patrol schedules of the guard. But you do not know who it is, do you? You receive your information through intermediaries, never meeting your source directly." Thorvald's eyes narrowed. "What of it?" "Your informant is Aldrich the steward," Ylva said clearly. "He has been selling information to fund his gambling debts. But more importantly, he has been setting traps for you." "Traps? The last 3 raids you conducted, they were not random successes, they were tests. Aldrich has been feeding you false information mixed with true, studying your methods, learning your weaknesses." Ylva's voice carried the authority of someone stating proven facts. "Tonight, he plans to betray you to the Jarl's forces. Your camp will be surrounded at dawn." The lie was delivered with such conviction that even Sten almost believed it, but Ylva was not finished. "However," she continued, "I can tell you exactly where Aldrich keeps his true records, the ones that show how much gold he has stolen, where he hides it, and which merchants carry the greatest wealth. Information worth far more than robbing 2 travelers." Thorvald leaned forward in his saddle. "And why would you offer this freely?" "Because I want safe passage to the Eastern Territories," Ylva said simply. "And because Aldrich deserves what is coming to him." The raider leader considered her words, weighing greed against suspicion. Around him his men waited for orders, but Ylva could see doubt creeping into their faces. Her horn blast had made them nervous, and her confident manner suggested she knew more than she was revealing. "Thorvald," one of his lieutenants called softly, "the woman speaks sense. Aldrich has been skimming from our shares, claiming the jobs pay less than they do." "And if she lies?" Thorvald demanded. "Then you have lost nothing but time," Ylva replied. "But if I speak truth, you will have gained wealth beyond anything these simple raids provide." The horn in her hands caught the afternoon light, and she raised it meaningfully. "Choose, quickly. My allies grow restless, and the day grows short for men who wish to be far from here before sunset." Thorvald's gaze swept the ridgelines again, seeing threats in every shadow and movement that might be nothing more than wind through the rocks. For a moment, the balance hung in perfect tension, greed warring with caution, violence held at bay by the promise of greater reward. When he finally spoke, his words would determine whether Ylva's desperate gamble succeeded or whether the narrow valley would become their tomb. Thorvald's decision came swift and brutal. "You speak well, woman, but words are wind." His scarred face split into a cruel grin. "I think we will take your information and your lives. Dead tongues tell no tales to jarls or stewards." He raised his axe as a signal to his men, but Ylva was already moving. The horn sang out again, this time in a complex pattern of notes that she had practiced during their journey, short blasts and long calls that seemed to answer themselves from the rocky heights above. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The raiders' horses began to shy and dance nervously, sensing their riders' growing unease. Men trained in violence knew the sound of coordinated signals when they heard them, and these echoes spoke of careful planning and hidden numbers. "Now, Sten," Ylva called, and the giant warrior moved with deadly precision. But instead of charging directly at the raiders, Sten followed the plan they had rehearsed. He struck at the loose rocks along the valley's eastern wall, his great sword ringing against stone like a bell. The carefully chosen stones tumbled down in a controlled avalanche, blocking the raiders' primary escape route while creating the illusion of archers firing from concealment. Thorvald's mount reared in panic as stones clattered around them. "It's a trap. They have bowmen in the rocks." Ylva seized the moment of confusion to complete her deception. "Surrender now," she called out with regal authority, "and Jarl Magnus may show mercy. Continue this attack and face the consequences." She held aloft a piece of cloth that gleamed silver in the afternoon light, the banner she had torn from her own cloak and painted with mud and stream water to create the illusion of an official standard. To men already rattled by phantom signals and falling stones, it looked convincingly like a jarl's battle flag. But Thorvald was no coward, and desperation made him dangerous. "Lies and tricks," he roared, spurring his horse forward. "I'll silence that silver tongue myself." He charged directly at Ylva, his great axe raised for a killing blow. For a moment, it seemed her clever strategy had only delayed the inevitable. Then Sten appeared between them like a force of nature. The collision when they met was tremendous, two giants crashing together with the sound of thunder. Thorvald's axe met Sten's sword in a shower of sparks, and for several heartbeats they strained against each other, neither giving ground. Around them, chaos erupted as the remaining raiders found themselves fighting shadows. Ylva's horn calls continued to echo from the heights, joined now by the sound of loose stones tumbling down the slopes. To men already unnerved by phantom armies, every echo became another threat, every falling pebble the prelude to attack. "Where are they?" one raider screamed, swinging his sword at empty air. "I can't see them." "The ridges," another called back. "They're in the ridges." Several riders broke formation entirely, fleeing toward what they thought was safety, but which Ylva's positioning had made into a death trap. The narrow passages she had identified as escape routes became bottlenecks, where panicked horses stumbled and threw their riders. Meanwhile, Sten and Thorvald fought with the savage intensity of two predators who had finally met their match. Thorvald was skilled and experienced, his axe work speaking of countless victories. But Sten fought with something the raider lacked: purpose beyond mere survival. "You chose the wrong travelers to threaten," Sten growled as their weapons locked again. "Did I?" Thorvald sneered. "Your woman's tricks may scatter my men, but they cannot save her from—" He never finished the sentence. Sten's response was swift and final, his blade finding the gap in Thorvald's armor with surgical precision. The raider leader toppled from his saddle, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers to ring against the stone. The death of their leader broke what remained of the raiders' courage. Those who could still ride fled in all directions, convinced they had stumbled into a carefully planned ambush by superior forces. They left behind only the dead and the echo of Ylva's horn still calling from the valley walls. In the sudden silence that followed, Sten turned to find Ylva sitting calmly on Embla's back, her makeshift banner still held high. Around her, the scattered farmers who had come at the sound of her horn calls began emerging from their hiding places among the rocks, for Ylva had not been entirely deceiving the raiders. Her signals had been real calls for help that the local farmers had answered, remembering the strange woman who had helped organize relief after the last raider attack. They had brought no weapons beyond farm tools and slings, but their presence had made her phantom army real enough to matter. Old Henrik the shepherd approached her with something that looked remarkably like reverence. In his weathered hands he carried a simple crown woven from pine branches, a victor's wreath crafted in the old tradition. "Lady," he said formally, "you have saved us all. Accept this token of our gratitude." As Henrik placed the rough crown on her golden hair, Ylva felt something fundamental shift within her. She was no longer the discarded daughter sold for silver, no longer the broken woman who saw herself as a burden. She was Ylva the wise, protector of the innocent and architect of victory through courage and intelligence. The transformation was complete. 6 months later, Ylva stood in the doorway of her new school in Ironhold, watching the morning sun paint the eastern mountains gold. The settlement had proven everything she had hoped, a place where worth was measured by contribution rather than circumstance, where a woman's wisdom was valued as highly as a warrior's strength. The school occupied a modest stone building in the heart of town, its single room filled with wooden benches and carefully maintained writing materials. On the wall hung her bronze medallion, polished bright and serving as both inspiration and reminder of how far she had traveled from the broken girl sold by her family. "Teacher Ylva," called young Astrid, named for the grandmother she would never know, as she hurried through the door with her arms full of bark scrolls. "I've finished copying the star charts as you requested." Ylva smiled at the girl's eager face. Astrid was one of her first students, a farmer's daughter whose quick mind had been going to waste before the school opened. Now she could read fluently in 2 languages and navigate by the stars with confidence that would serve her well in whatever path she chose. "Excellent work," Ylva said, accepting the carefully drawn charts. "Your writing grows clearer each week." Through the window she caught sight of Sten crossing the town square, his massive frame unmistakable even at a distance. He carried himself differently now, still alert and capable, but without the weight of shame that had once bowed his shoulders. The people of Ironhold had welcomed him as their protector and marshal, a position that allowed him to use his warrior skills in service of something worthy. As if sensing her gaze, Sten looked toward the school and raised his hand in greeting. The simple gesture warmed Ylva's heart in ways that still surprised her. Their relationship had grown slowly in the months since their victory over the raiders, built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than the desperate circumstances that had first thrown them together. "Will you marry him?" Astrid asked with the directness of youth. Ylva laughed softly. "What makes you think of such things? He looks at you the way my father looks at my mother when he thinks no one is watching," the girl said sagely, "and you smile differently when he's near." Before Ylva could respond, Sten himself appeared in the doorway, ducking slightly to clear the frame. In his hands he carried a small object wrapped in soft leather. "Good morning, teacher," he said formally, though his eyes held warmth. "I hope I do not interrupt important lessons." "Never an interruption," Ylva replied. "What brings you to our humble school?" Sten glanced meaningfully at young Astrid, who took the hint with good grace. "I should check on the other students," she said diplomatically, gathering her scrolls and stepping outside. When they were alone, Sten approached Ylva with the careful reverence she had come to associate with his more serious moods. "I have something for you," he said, offering the leather-wrapped bundle. Ylva unwrapped it carefully, revealing a simple ring forged from silver and iron, twisted together in an intricate pattern. It was not the delicate ornament a traditional bride might expect, but something far more meaningful, a symbol of partnership between equals. Gunnar the smith crafted it to my specifications, Sten explained. The silver represents wisdom and learning, while the iron speaks of strength and protection. Together, they form something stronger than either alone. Ylva turned the ring over in her hands, admiring the craftsmanship. It is beautiful, but what does it signify? A proposal, Sten said simply, not of marriage in the traditional sense, where a woman becomes property of her husband's house, but of true partnership, two people choosing to build a life together as equals. Ylva looked into his pale blue eyes and saw not the desperate warrior who had once bought her freedom, but a man who had found his own redemption through service to others. And what would such a partnership look like? You would continue your school, expanding it as you see fit. I would continue my duties as marshal, protecting what we have built together. We would share our lives, but not lose ourselves in each other. Sten paused, then added more quietly, and perhaps, if the gods will it, we might raise children who know from birth that their worth comes from their hearts and minds, not from the chance circumstances of their bodies. The words painted a picture that made Ylva's chest tight with longing. A future where she was not defined by what she had lost, but celebrated for what she had gained. A partnership built on mutual respect rather than traditional obligations. There is one condition, she said seriously. Sten's face grew solemn. Name it. We use this school to help others, like us, the discarded ones, the forgotten, the broken, who still have something valuable to offer. We become the people who see worth where others see only waste. Relief and joy spread across Sten's weathered features. I would want nothing more. Ylva extended her left hand, and Sten slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly despite their steadiness in battle. The metal felt warm against her skin, and she realized it was not just a symbol of their union, but of the new identity she had forged from the ashes of her old life. Outside, young Astrid's voice could be heard explaining star navigation to a group of fascinated children. The sound filled Ylva with deep satisfaction here, was proof that knowledge passed down creates more knowledge, that wisdom shared multiplies rather than diminishes. So, Sten said, his voice soft with wonder, Ylva the wise will become Ylva the partner? No, Ylva corrected gently. I will become Ylva the complete, a woman who has learned that true strength comes not from standing alone, but from choosing carefully who deserves to stand beside you. They moved together toward the window, watching the children gather around Astrid as she pointed out constellation patterns in the morning sky. In the distance, the mountains of Ironhold rose like guardians over their small community of dreamers and builders. Ylva touched the bronze medallion on the wall, no longer a symbol of what she had lost, but a reminder of what she had reclaimed. Then she looked at the silver and iron ring on her finger, representing the future she and Sten would build together. Sometimes the people who were supposed to love us most were indeed the ones who hurt us deepest. But sometimes, from the ashes of that betrayal, we found the strength to love ourselves enough to demand better. And sometimes, if we were very fortunate, we found someone who had always seen our true worth, even when we had forgotten it ourselves.